measure of the fit threshold and the age range. Because if I look at the percentage of screen-detected cancers in Denmark and Holland, for instance, they range somewhere between 22 and 24%. Correct me if I'm wrong, my colleagues here. Whereas in England, the proportion of cancers that are detected by screening is only 10%. And the reason for that is we have a very high threshold, 120, a very restricted age range. And I've campaigned strongly for 4 or 5 years to say, you know, we need to drop the threshold, we need to extend the age range, because we're being left behind by these other countries that have much greater access to screening with lower thresholds. So do you consider that to be a valid endpoint of your considerations of the threshold and the age range and the frequency?
I think it definitely should be. It makes sense that if the threshold's high, you are going to miss the opportunity for the potentially earlier detections of the cancers. As I said, I don't work with data from the national program, unfortunately, which is a screening program, but we do a lot of research in individuals who are undergoing colonoscopy for surveillance purposes. And what we do find there is the detection you can still detect later cancers, interval cancers, post-colonoscopy cancers with the fecal tests as well. But yeah, using that as a decider. But it seems just a lot of countries don't have the capacity. Australia is really limited with its capacity to do the colonoscopies on time, but yet we have a relatively low threshold compared to every other country.
I think we only have time for maybe just one more question.
It's Alan Smith from Dublin, Ireland. Another threshold question and a quick run across speakers. We talk about the healthcare environment and the relationship between fit thresholds. What about the political environment? What do you think? Will you be allowed to change the threshold, do you think, if we played politics as well or factored in the political world? I'm a consultant in public health medicine and I have to face that one. So any advice or tips?
I'll speak for Australia, and I know there's often reviews of whether the threshold is suitable. And in Australia, we actually do a 2-sample fit. So there's often questions about, because 2 samples mean more people are going to colonoscopy as well. So there's often considerations of whether this should be adjusted. So yeah, there are political aspects, definitely.
Yeah, it's the good point. And in fact, for example, for Italy, it's the issue of changing the threshold might be highly relevant, given that the coverage by invitation in several regions, in particular in southern Italy, is very low because there is not enough colonoscopy capacity. But it seems a topic that cannot be addressed, not by health professional and not by politicians. No one would accept to have an approach that is we are matching the positivity rate to the colonoscopy capacity. We have to offer the best to everyone. If we cannot cover everyone, that's another issue. But it's a political attitude, it's culture also.
I appreciate your persistence. Is it a really short question?
Yeah. So then in Australia, they are in the fit test. Even you actually reduce the threshold, you only increase the sensitivity to low 80%. But I saw in Peranis, the kind of meta-analysis, when they are using Roche's fit test, they can increase, they can reduce the threshold to get about a 90% sensitivity. Maybe can you comment on that? So then what kind of fit test that you are using?
The fit test used in Australia is the OC sensor.
Okay.
With the threshold set at the 20 micrograms per gram.
Okay, I want to thank the speakers for that great discussion and that Q&A from the audience. I was looking for your full name. Yeah. No, I didn't.
Green. Oh, it's dead. It's so much. Got it back up. Oh, it dropped for like a. There's yeah.
Still connected?
If had that, yeah.
Oh, hello? Is the Zoom still connected?
Our Zoom is disconnected.
Maybe it's good to check. And then in a few minutes, we will start with session 4. Hopefully. Should I join the meeting? Do you have the ID?
It's still broadcasting, or? Yeah, well, they managed to bring it back, but this is the account that we want from, and they're doing something here, unless it wants to do something.
Okay. That looks good.
Thank you. Okay, so it will automatically come up in the queue.
Yeah. You see.
Okay, I think we're back
Yes.
online.
Okay, we're back online. So we would like to start with the final session of this plenary session of the morning program. My name is Pieter Risse. I'm a PhD candidate from the Erasmus Medical Center and the Netherlands Cancer Institute, both in the Netherlands, and also involved in studies looking into new protein tests like the multi-target FIT. And I will chair this session together with Dr. May.
Thank you very much. My name is Paula May. I'm Associate Professor of Medicine at UCLA Health and in the VA, and I focus on research in colorectal cancer prevention control with a focus on inequities. Thank you.
And we have a great program with 3 presentations, of which about the first already has been mentioned several times during this morning. So without any further ado, I would give the word to Robert Brezorier, professor from Houston, Texas, and he will talk with us about the new test consensus from the expert working group. Version 2 is done. What's next? And how can we have a real world impact? The floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Let me first, this is the advance here. Okay. All right. Is it that thing? Yeah, we'll try. Okay. So about 2 years ago now, I think, Graham approached myself and Carlos Nori and a number of people and said, you know, it's time to think about revising our thoughts relative to non-invasive screening tests, because there had been a publication in 2016 from many of you, but a lot has changed. And I'll just say the title of the paper we eventually came up with was an efficient strategy for evaluating new non-invasive screening tests, the guiding principles. I think it's important to point out efficient doesn't equate to simple. I mean, as we heard today, there's nothing simple about this, and the principles are somewhat complicated. But what we tried to do is to come up with a strategy which would move things forward in an efficient manner. And we'll try, oh, maybe this one?
That's what it's pointing.
That work?
Big green.
You see the green button?
This one?
The big green button?
Big green button. Okay. So then in 2016, and I'll be very brief, I'll jump between lunch. Oh, before I forget, for Susan Parry, we in America do know where New Zealand is because that's where they filmed Lord of the Rings. So anyway, in 2016, I think Graham Young, who's been mentioned many times, was very prescient in leading a group to come up with recommendations for a stepwise approach to the evaluation of new screening tests, and not just non-invasive tests, which was the focus of our current paper, but certainly much has changed. And this was a slide that Graham showed at an earlier meeting emphasizing there's been a lot of new developments in biomarker technologies, but with that comes a lot of complexity. I mean, there are multi-marker tests, multi-organ tests, and with this new technology, we really have to come to terms with how do we put this all into the big scheme of things. Differing goals, the fact that, in fact, around the world now, the good thing that has happened is the increase in number of organized screening programs, but a lot was missing from the 2016 paper, the complexity of the algorithms that might need to be used, the acknowledgement of the new evolution of biomarkers. So we took a Glaser and Delphi approach, and I will say that having gone through this, this was very comprehensive, and I wanted to scream at times at Graham to let's get moving on this, because he really was adamant about getting feedback from everybody, many of the people in this room, and there were 47 people involved in addition to feedback from industry. And this was a true Delphi process. It took almost 2 years. It was interesting. I just reviewed another paper that claimed a Delphi process to do within about 2 months, and I don't see that's possible. But we truly incorporated the input as much as possible from everyone. And we went through a series of principles expanding to 12 final principles, in addition to fairly comprehensive discussions related to each of these principles in the form of an explanatory text. Now, we did submit this paper to a high impact journal, got some pretty good feedback, and this is in revision. But in that revision, based on one reviewer at any rate, put this comment in, which I think summarizes in a nutshell the approach we took to this paper. That is, colorectal cancer is a global disease, and the one-size-fits-all approach to screening may not be relevant, but guiding principles are necessary and should be universal. While the epidemiology of colorectal cancer will undoubtedly change over time, which may alter the composition of intended use populations, and that intended use population is very important, we present a framework that allows a dynamic process that has broad application, and this process is not bound by any one specific test. So that was the issue. We want some general principles that will be applicable in the future as we proceed, no matter what the technology. Now, as we've discussed today, when you look at a screening test and you ask the question, how good should it be? It's not just about performance in terms of sensitivity and specificity in one round of screening. You need to take into account a lot of things like, what are the resources? Are we dealing with individual versus population benefit? What are the costs? So these are important issues, and we've tried to take those into account. And if you look at the traditional way that tests have been moved along from the laboratory to clinical practice, this is a long process, and traditionally this took over a decade. First, we had to go through basic research, translational applications, and then the clinical trials that went through clinical research, but then issues that usually don't be taken into account, coverage, adaptation, market access, et cetera. And I kind of threw this in during one of our talks along the way. One of the complexities we don't usually think of is, how do you actually get this to market once you have a test? Because at least in the United States, and I'm sure this is true in many other countries, you need to deal with guideline from professional societies, the regulatory agencies, and even then third-party payers, as well as governmental payers. And in fact, maybe getting ahead of this, CMS or Medicare in the United States actually recently put forth some guidelines of what they might pay for in terms of performance characteristics. And they set the order of a 90% specificity, 74% sensitivity threshold for cancer only. They didn't even deal with precursor lesions. And this will no doubt change over time. The other issue is one-step versus two-step screening, which has been mentioned. And this is in the simple sense. In the United States, we often use colonoscopy as a first-level screening test. whereas in the vast majority of the world, it's a two-step process. And that first step is usually fit, but we will now have to take into account other types of screening tests. We have a fit DNA test for stool, but blood tests are on the horizon. And there's been a burgeoning interest in this. And the way these studies are being done today, I don't think we could have done previously. So as I'm sure many of you are aware, and I think Dr. Shakat's going to talk about some of these tests after I finish. Some of these trials have incorporated sample sizes of up to 50,000 individuals, which we could not possibly do before. So this was the first, this is the first figure in the paper, and it's pretty much what I showed you in the last slide, although with a couple of, a little more complexity involved. And you can't read the little superscripts, but we tried to incorporate where each of the principles we set forward would come into this screening process. I'm going to go through this really quickly for sake of time. This afternoon, we will have a session where we can expand on these things. But we all decided as part of the Delphi process on the general principles. In review, one of the reviewers, I think quite properly, asked us to essentially rewrite the whole paper in terms of, we couldn't change the principles, which was decided on, but to organize this in a way that made more sense. And we did. So just real quickly, a lot of these things are what we discussed, but it really codifies a number of the issues. That is, okay, what do you want to get out of a screening program? I mean, is it mortality? Is it incidence? The fact that screening is a multi-step process, not multi-step in terms of one step versus two-step, but we need to not only look at the performance characteristics of a test, but what is the impact on society? Who's going to pay for this? All the vast complexities. And who do we want to identify? A screening test should identify individuals with an increased likelihood of cancer or advanced precursor lesions. We discussed that. What do you want to detect? What are these precursor lesions? And the fact that, the natural history of all lesions are not the same. This has been brought up. New biomarkers, as they're developed, may not detect lesions with the same natural history, and this may not be needed to take into account. And what do we expect from a non-invasive screening test? The issue of an adjustable test positivity threshold, which we discussed, is this relevant? Can this be something that's initiated? And then as you go through the steps of screening, can you use comparison to an existing comparator, or do you have to do colonoscopy on everyone? What are the implications of that? How long does it take? And then the performance characteristics that often get forgotten. I mean, this is not so simple. Once you have a test, there are stringencies in bringing these to market and to clinical application that are in place from regulatory agencies. So we came up with a 4-phased approach. The phase is a little bit different than I showed you on the previous slide, but okay, in bringing things forward, we need to start with a process that will allow us to look more broadly with a little less stringency at the tests that are out there and see if we should bring those tests forward. So in this first phase, perhaps it's okay to use a comparator test and not colonoscopy on everyone. We're looking at the ability to discriminate between cancer and non-cancer states. If that goes forward, then we need to set the thresholds for what we expect for that test in terms of cutoffs and things like that, because you really need, if you're going to go into a big, large-scale clinical trial, you have to preset those thresholds. And then single screening round, what do you get out of that, which is the way most of these programs are run. But what we also wanted to take into account is in a phase 4, how do you then, look at multiple rounds of screening, and what is the impact on both mortality and incidence? So real quickly, and we can discuss these this afternoon, we came up with a variety of algorithms and a variety of scenarios that would fit across a broad application in different settings, with the idea that one size may not fit all. And so this is for early phase 1 screening. I'm not going to go through this in great detail. We can talk about it this afternoon. But then looking at each of these phases in terms of what are the goals we want to accomplish, what's the context, how should we approach this, what are the hurdles we need to face in moving these things forward. Then came up with study designs and frameworks for the phase 3 studies with a variety of scenarios that would take into account dealing with designs for accuracy, both on an individual basis for a test, as well as in a programmatic setting. And then the next steps, the plan is after publishing this first paper, and I really have to thank everyone who played a role in bringing this forward, because this really was an all-encompassing process, but we have gotten good feedback, and I really do expect this to be published hopefully shortly. But then the plan is none of these principles were without a lot of discussion, and I think there's still some controversy. So we want to actually have a special issue of a journal that's agreed to publish these. Dealing with some of these controversies, we'll invite a number of people to participate. Issues like trial design, what's the appropriate target endpoint, how good is good enough. I mean, how much flexibility do we really have in designing these trials? What should the power statistical considerations be? Can we use modeling and surrogates? Is that something that we'll be allowed to do? What about academic industrial partnerships? Because that's probably the only way we're going to move these things forward in a rapid manner. And then what often gets forgotten, what are the regulatory challenges? Especially we deal with that in the United States, and it's not so easy. So I'll stop there. And again, we'll have an opportunity this afternoon to discuss some of these issues.
Our next speaker is Dr. Asma Shaukat, who is here to speak about novel non-invasive tests on the horizon. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the WEO and the moderators. It's great to be here. So I think I'll be summarizing what everybody's heard already. And I think Michael summarized it well, that colonoscopy applied to a low-risk population is never going to yield the benefits that we expect of it. So what are our options for non-invasive testing? So this talk figures in nicely. So I'll review the status of tests that fall in this category: blood-based, some stool-based tests, also some imaging tests that could be considered non-invasive or minimally invasive, and then briefly touch upon the perils and pitfalls of these multi-cancer early detection tests that are on the horizon, and leave you with some summary points. So this is pretty much a summary slide of all the novel tests that are up and coming. So the directions are blood-based tests, and you can see some I've listed there, stool-based tests. There's at least 2 looking promising, and some image-based tests. And they have different methods of approaching the same thing, but really the principle is the same. It's been helped with our ability to detect even a single mutated cell in the peripheral blood and use AI and machine learning to improve our signal. So let's go through some of these. So this is what our paradigm looks like. We've known about this adenoma carcinoma sequence, and this is where we thought our options were fit DNA, primarily for early stage and advanced stage cancer detection. Colonoscopy should theoretically detect the entire spectrum, but there's a whole burgeoning class of these tests that rely on cell-free or circulating tumor DNA, glycoprotein, messenger RNA, or other immune signals, along with added AI and machine learning platforms to improve our detection. So where do these fit in? These are data from clinicaltrials.gov. It's publicly available. And again, there are updates to this, but these are the current tests, at least in the US, that are on the horizon. So you can see I've given examples of 2 stool-based tests, the exact test, multi-target stool DNA test, version 2.0, and sorry, how do I go back? There we go. Thank you. And a multi-target stool RNA test. So, and then there are 2 blood-based tests, one that you'll see results of at this meeting, the Garden test, and then the Freenome test. Again, technologies are a little different. They all have their secret sauce, but the basic principles of the tests are very similar. And you can see the target enrollment, as Bob alluded to, anywhere between 10,000 to Freenome, which originally planned to recruit 25,000, but now is at closer to 46,000 enrolled. And the reason for these large enrollments is, again, the same thing we heard earlier today. In the average risk screening population, it's the number of cancers that we need to get to, maybe at least 50 or 60 to really have an accurate signal. And to achieve that, because the rates of cancer in the average risk population are falling, particularly in a population coming for screening colonoscopy, these trials have all needed to recruit additional subjects. And you can see they're all either completed or expected to complete very shortly. So this is going to be an exciting field to watch as we see some of the results unfold. So again, as we see some of these results, a framework to think about evaluating these blood-based tests very nicely laid out in this publication by many of the authors in the room. And again, it starts with phase 1, looking at known cancers and controls, then across the continuum of the neoplastic lesion. And now we're at phase 3, assessing what it does in a single screening round on an intent to screen population, which is our average risk screening population, however we define it. And then the phase 4 will be how it performs over multiple rounds yet to come. And there's other tests also that have cleared at least phase 1 and 2 and are either embarking on phase 3 or have started a lot of their phase 3. So this field is going to get, very quickly, very exciting. What does Medicare think of all of this? So Medicare is the government payer in the US, and they kind of dictate national coverage decisions. So they came up with their national coverage decision about blood-based tests. And whether we like it or not, this is what they said. If a test achieves these parameters or exceeds them, we will approve it, meaning we will pay for it. And once Medicare, Medicaid pay for something, generally most other payers follow. And they said if the test has a sensitivity of 74%, specificity of 90%, and FDA approval. There used to be another condition of guideline approval, but that was later dropped. So this is the bar that these tests are trying to meet or exceed in order to be in the US market. And one test that, again, we're going to see the results of this presented in detail at this meeting. So I encourage everybody to come to that session. But so far, what they've released on their website is the following. It was a 20,000 person study in the US average risk population. And the sensitivity of colorectal cancer of a one-time test is 83%, a specificity of 90%. I think they have about 60 cancers in the cohort. And advanced adenoma sensitivity of 13%. So based on these parameters, this test seems to have met the bar. So more to come on this as we see the details. So with opening these floodgates of these blood-based tests, there's a lot of practical questions that we as a group need to address and perhaps hold these companies accountable to providing answers for. How would it be ordered? What information would be required so that it's ordered on the right population? How will it be completed? Will there be an inbuilt navigation once the order is placed? How will it be collected? Is there somebody needing to come to clinic? Are we sending our patients to a commercial lab or sending mobile phlebotomy to their home? How is it processed? Is it a commercial lab, a central lab, or regional labs are able to do it? What's the turnaround time? And what degradation can we expect? What number of incomplete or non-conclusive tests? And who's going to interpret this? Is it just a yes, no? Is there going to be a threshold? Can we change the threshold like FIT? Is it the clinician or a staff can release these results? And how is the follow-up colonoscopy going to be ensured? Because they all fall in that two-step paradigm. And then the bigger questions, which hopefully phase 4 studies will answer. What does the repeat interval look like? And will it come from the company telling us? Will it be experts in the room based on modeling studies? And are we going to look for and wait for long-term outcomes, such as reduction in colon cancer incidence and mortality? What's going to happen to false positives? Will we get good answers of long-term follow-up? And then comparative effectiveness. We already have a few comparative effectiveness studies ongoing with FIT and colonoscopy. So will we expect the same from these? because this might impinge on, again, stool-based testing that we already offer. So are we going to ask for a study? And who will it be available to and when, what the cost might be, and what is the adherence of the actual 2 steps? Does it actually meet and exceed the benchmarks we want? If you look at the US population, and this is a study looking at 1,000 unscreened Americans, calling them and saying, which test do you prefer? And they were given options of the 5 US Multi-Society Task Force recommended tests, or just the tests that are in tier 1, which is FIT and colonoscopy. And you can see there's a big, pretty healthy appetite for non-invasive tests. And it doesn't vary very much by age. So, just looking at the tier 1 tests and what patients prefer. And surprisingly, a lot of them do prefer a FIT. And so there's a pretty high appetite. So the question is, will these new tests replace this market or get the additional unscreened? And that's a really critical question. If you look at head-to-head comparison studies of blood-based testing versus stool-based testing, this was a randomized trial using epiprocolon versus FIT in Washington State. And you can see the adherence rate for the 413 average risk individuals randomized was extremely high. If we can achieve a FIT adherence of 88%, we'll take it. I don't think we need to look for a different test. But according to this study, there was an additional increase in adherence of 11 percentage points with blood-based testing. So that gives us some enthusiasm that perhaps people unwilling to uptake stool-based tests might gravitate towards this test, which helps us reduce that unscreened portion. So now I'll briefly touch upon these multi-cancer early detection tests because things are even more thorny there. And this slide, I think, summarizes it all. There are way more multi-cancer early detection tests coming our way. So it's a huge tsunami that's been unleashed. And there's the medical office and us saying, I think, with our patients saying, I think I'd like a MCED, but which one? This is just one example of all the MCEDs in the pipeline. And many of the tests that I mentioned for CRC are also developing MCED tests. And you can see, their targeted cancers. A lot of them, most of them include colorectal cancers. And as you can imagine, lung, breast, pancreas are pretty much included in most of their spectrum. So this is a huge area that we need to understand and deal with. And there's a lot of issues there. I'll just refer you to this very nice review that kind of summarizes them for you. Because unlike for colon cancer, where we have colonoscopy as the fairly good test, the imaging tests following these other cancers tend to be imperfect. This whole body scanning can lead to incidentalomas. What do we do about false positives there? And the burden of confirming these tests can be very costly and take us down a rabbit hole. So there's critical gaps in our knowledge, whether these are cancers we should be screening for truly, and what is the benefit. So there's a lot of work to be done here. And I encourage everybody in the audience to think about these. There are 2 tests in the US in this MCED category that are kind of leading the way, CancerSeek and GRAIL. The GRAIL test is already released as a lab-developed test, meaning anybody can get this test. It's not covered by insurance or Medicare, so it's an out-of-pocket cost of $1,000. You can get this test now. And so these tests are already in the market. The Garden Shield test is also available to order now, but definitely we need more studies to understand how they benefit. But I'll tell you, the public enthusiasm kind of outstrips the pace of research. So, this was a news report, a San Francisco rapper who's also a cannabis entrepreneur, got one of these blood tests, and you can probably guess which one. And he was diagnosed with, it was positive for likely colon cancer. He got a colonoscopy and he was diagnosed with colon cancer at a young age of 40. So he's been all over the internet talking about this blood-based test. He's even written a rap song about how his life was saved. So yes, it's very meaningful to patients, but this is really powerful, right? The patient narrative for cancer is very powerful. So this is what we have to understand and then explain to our next patients. NCI has launched an initiative to understand some of these issues. It's called the NCI Screening Research Network, and they are rapidly selecting sites that can enroll these average risk patients. And the idea is they're planning to do this Vanguard study where patients will be randomized to one of these several MSEDs, and then we'll look at different outcomes. So at this moment, they're working with companies and different test makers to participate and offer their test for these trials. So more to come on this. So again, summarizing some of the image-based tests, the colon capsule is a great option, kind of fits in between, perhaps either as a primary screening test or as a step between FIT and colonoscopy. And it's getting better and better. So this is the last trial. The sensitivity for polyps equal to or greater than 10 millimeter is 85% or higher. So these are tests that can detect polyps. And they now are enhancing their ability and sensitivity by adding AI. They're also doing low dose prep, AI integration, wireless recording, uploading to a cloud. So we could mail this to a patient's home, have them take the test, wear the recorder all day. It gets uploaded to a cloud. We could read it remotely anywhere from the world. And essentially that person could then be triaged to either a colonoscopy or considered screen. So pivotal studies are already underway, so more to come on that. And then the final technology is a CT capsule. Again, same concept, swallow capsule emits radiation about the dose of one chest X-ray, and it can be done without a prep. So that's the big attraction there. Promising pivotal studies, and then they've launched a US study, which is ongoing with a goal to enroll 1,000 patients. Endpoint is detection of polyps 6 millimeter larger. So more to come on these. So in summary, novel blood-based tests are moving into the market, whether we like it or not, and at a pace faster than we can keep up with research. We should identify ways to learn from them as we go. Consumer interest and marketing may get ahead of scientific evidence. There's also these minimally invasive tests like CT and colon capsule, and where they fit in will be determined. But application and implementation is truly what needs careful evaluation. And that's truly where all the great minds in this room come into play. So with that, I'd like to thank WEO.
Thank you very much for this beautiful overview. You can sit here at front. And then we will continue with our final talk from Dr. Su about the shifting from universal to precision screening. The floor is yours.
Okay, I'm Dr. Xu on behalf of Taiwan Colorectal Cancer Screening Group to give this topic on from universal to precision screening for colorectal cancer. Okay, so from the previous study, we have shown that the guaiac-based tests have benefit of the mortality reduction, and later on, with also the effectiveness of feed-based screening on also proved by the service screening from the Italy and also the KMPC, and also in the Taiwan, Professor Cho has used the Taiwan population of 5 million and to prove the effectiveness of feed-based screening in reducing the mortality by 40% and also the stage shifting by 34%. But however, as we have already heard repeatedly in this room, that one size may not fit for all. The current study from randomized control trial to service cancer screening, and also the meta-analysis and the cost-effective analysis, all of them now use the paradigm of average risk approach. However, considering the risk of colorectal cancer in the population, they can be a spectrum ranging from the very high risk to the low risk. And when we apply the average risk approach to the high-risk population, they may subject to false negative and also the following interval cancer. On the other hand, if we apply the average risk approach to the very low-risk group, they may subject to false positive and also the over-detection. And the recent finding on the dose response of the fecal hemoglobin concentration on the incidence of colorectal cancer and also the mortality of the colorectal cancer entail the quantitative use of fecal hemoglobin concentration to determine the risk of the population and further stratify. Based on this determination and the baseline fecal hemoglobin concentration, we can prolong the interscreening interval for the very low risk group and provide the intense interscreen interval for the high-risk group. And also, not only for the general population, for the subject after polypectomy, we also find by using the empirical data in Taiwan, we also find that the dose of the updated fecal hemoglobin concentration associated with the following risk of the incidence of colorectal cancer. And by using this up-to-date fecal hemoglobin concentration, we may determine the interval of the follow-up trial. And further, the state-specific Phe-wise and the G-wise risk factors also entail us provide more information on determining the risk of the population. And the implementation of personalized screening for reducing the clinical capacity and over-detection was further motivated by the following three issues. The first is the impact of COVID-19 on the backlog of screening and colonoscopy. Taking Taiwan as an example, compared with the pre-COVID the period, the screen-detected colorectal cancer have decreased by 1/4, which is bring a lot of backlog. And also the change in the demographic, also using Taiwan as an example, also increase about one-fifth the clinical demands of the screening and also the colonoscopy. And also the over-detection. Dr. Lin used the digital twin design to evaluate the feed-based population-based screening. The over-detection the average over-detection rate were around 10%, ranging from 4 to 60%, depends on the colorectal neoplasm concerned. So by using, following the previous rationale, by using the different risk, we can determine the different, we can have, we don't need to fit one size to the all. We can determine different sizes. For example, for the low risk, we can prolong the interscreen interval to up to 6 years. However, for the a high-risk subject, we can shorten the interscreen interval to 1 year. And by using this approach, applying to the 1 million population during the 12-year period, we can reduce the 500,000 needs for the feed screening, and also decrease the colonoscopy to 5,000, and also to reduce the number of over-detection to 1/8. And also by using the Markov decision tree and also the Bayesian network approach, we can evaluate the cost effectiveness of this approach. Although the gathering of these genetic markers may cost some, but the use of personalized screening also lies in the fourth quadrant of CE plan, which is cost saving. And also, we know that the progression of colorectal cancer from normal to adenoma and early colorectal cancer, and finally to colorectal cancer following the adenoma and colorectal cancer sequence. And for different stage, we have different public health approach to prevent, ranging from the primary prevention, secondary prevention, that is screening, and different by using different modality, and also the tertiary prevention. In different different transition, we can have the state-specific risk scores, which is in turn determined by different features of the including the demographic and the lifestyle factors, and also the genetic susceptibility, and also the prognostic outcomes. By using this to elucidate the progression of colorectal cancer using the Bayesian network to have the causal relationship, we can apply the different approach. In here, we focus on using the combination of the primary prevention and secondary prevention. For the secondary prevention, we also apply the risk-based risk scoring guidance screening approach. For the primary prevention, we focus on the high-risk approach. This is the risk score higher than median. We providing them with a series of primary prevention programs, including the smoking cessation, reduction of alcohol consumption, and also the treatment for meds, and also the chemo prevention with aspirin. By using this approach, we can increase the effectiveness of mortality reduction from 40 to around 50%, without increase the clinical and also the screening burden. So by using this digital twin approach, we can, for different risk approach, we can choose between the combination of three levels of prevention. maybe for the second level increasing, just like the novel approaches, we can choose which the subject of different risk level maybe benefit from the use of different screen modality, and by using the risk to inform each subject of their risk, we can provide them with the optimal test. Okay. So and by making use of this chance, our group of IICCS will in this year we will have a conference in Japan in December. In this year, the theme is precision cancer screening with AI perspective, and we will especially focus on colorectal cancer prevention. You're warmly welcome to join with us. And I want to make you this chance to thank the Taiwan Total Cancer Screening Evaluation Group and also the invitation from WEO to share the experience with you.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers. So we recognize that we are over our allotted time and we are between you and your lunch, but we do want to take a couple minutes for Q&A. So if anyone has questions, we'll just do 3 to 5 minutes of questions and then there'll be lunch in the main room. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Rhoda Valoria again. So can you just help us with the use of sensitivity and specificity and negative predictive value and positive predictive value, pretest probability, and how that affects those parameters? Both in the guidelines and in the challenge, which we haven't really discussed at this meeting yet, of early onset colorectal cancer and the rise, because I think we know a lot about the older age groups, but we really have a problem with early onset colorectal cancer. And what are we looking at in the future with these new tests? And you know, the pretest probability is going to be very low. It's going to affect everything. So can you just run through that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so just didn't have time. I'm sorry, are we there? I think we're good. In the paper itself, we deal with those things like sensitivity, all those parameters in detail. So those were not ignored. I just didn't have time to go through it. And I recommend the paper to you. Happy to share. Those are the other questions are great questions because it really gets to intended use. And again, it's a talk I give, but when you deal with intended use, there are a couple issues there. One, of course, when you deal with young onset colorectal cancer, when I give that talk, I show the demographics from the United States based on the census, and you know, you've got a big lower part of that pyramid. You can't possibly do colonoscopy in all those patients. So you're going to have to deal with, you know, how good is good enough, and in that population where you have even a lower prevalence of cancer. I mean, everybody shows that curve that goes up this way over time for young onset colorectal cancer, but you have to look at the y-axis. And in fact, yes, if you do modeling in that 45 to 50 year group, you're gonna, you know, you can argue how that money is best spent. Do you want to capture that increase there, or do you want to spend it on that 40% of the population that never gets screened? But we're going to have to deal with that. The other thing we have to deal with when you talk about non-invasive tests is, despite what we'd like to think in the United States, it is a multi-tiered situation in which there's a large underserved population who don't get screened. And whatever test we have to do, we're going to have to develop something that it's probably point of care if we want to capture that population. And, you know, all these tests, especially the multi, you know, cancer tests that are being developed, are sort of black boxes that have to be done through a navigation to a single site. So that's what Exact does with Cologuard. Well, you know, Cologuard costs what Medicare pays for a colonoscopy. We can't sustain that. So we're going to have to come up with a cost-effective situation that's amenable to capturing those populations. Because right now, many of the screening programs for underserved populations are in fact two-step approaches because they're doing FIT for a variety of reasons, but it has to do with the fact that those resources aren't being used in an equal way. So that's that. But those are all. But intended use is another thing. Another slide I usually give, I don't want to be long-winded here, is we know a lot about the genetics of colorectal cancer in white people. We don't know. And then these are all things in other populations we have to come up with.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jasmin Spitzenberg from the Medical University of Vienna. And I think we heard in this talk, so thank you, very many interesting ideas about the brave new world of colorectal cancer screening. My question is really to kind of the whole panel on how we can use technologies to combat self-selection of participants. So we heard in a previous talk about self-selection of high-risk screening participants and also low-risk participants. And really, if you drive a precision screening approach, how can you combat the self-selection of these participants in colorectal cancer screening?
Yeah, that's at the crux of everything. And unfortunately, the trials that are done have to be volunteers that are willing to participate, right? And they already are earmarked as a different population, even though we say these are population-based studies. And, you know, us and others have shown that individuals considered average risk coming for screening colonoscopy are a much lower risk population than the general population out there, and hence we're seeing lower cancer rates. That's happening in multiple studies across ongoing and in the future. So I think it'll have to be two-step, and that's that. So we're at that step 3 where, you know, we take somewhat self-selected but unscreened population and all comers. But then the real, you know, proof will be once we then apply it to an undifferentiated population, and we have to ensure that it's, you know, offered to everybody equally. Now, who will uptake is slightly different, but the Kaiser program has very nicely demonstrated in their recent publication that by offering the test in a programmatic manner, they were actually able to reduce the cancer incidence and mortality gap between Blacks and whites, and screening rates were also similar. We also see that in the VA to some extent with universal health coverage. So I think one thing is understanding, you know, the efficacy of the test, and then the effectiveness, which ideally should be applied through a programmatic approach.
Thank you.
I think the risk-based approach may help some of this problem. We heard about shared decision making, but to do the shared decision making, first you have to decide the risk, and you share the risk with the patient. And the second, we have to provide them with a reasonable choice, and maybe the combination of the choice. Without the risk, determine the risk, you cannot determine the proper risk. And the third is determine the effectiveness. And it's not possible to apply a randomized control to only one subject, but using the digital twin approach, it's possible to inform the patient, not to substitute the randomized control, that control trial, just to inform the patient the possible outcome and the effectiveness of attending. This is one approach. And the second is, if you use the risk-based approach, it may be more easier before you decide a randomized control to have enough events to prove your hypothesis. There's a possible approach.
Yeah, so that gets the issue of how you regulate practice, because despite what we would like to say, you know, we could say, okay, if take colonoscopy and surveillance, you know, we have guidelines, very good guidelines that are evidence-based and make sense. How many gastroenterologists actually adhere to those guidelines? Unless we do that, or somehow it's legislated, which we'll bristle at, then the efficiency and the cost effectiveness of screening programs will not be there. So, you know, we can have all these ways to stratify patients, but we have to actually adhere to those guidelines.
Yeah, I think that's a very nice closing remark of this session, that we have to adhere to the guidelines and that we have to constitute them. Then I think it's now time for lunch, and we will be back here at 1, so in 40 minutes. Please be back in time for the busy afternoon.
Like the ones